let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
I'm Colonel Retired Charlie Simpson. I'm a retired Air Force officer and spent most of my career as an Air Force missileer in Air Force missiles Titan I, Minuteman, and ground launch cruise missiles.
Charlie, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for allowing us to come to your beautiful home here in lovely Colorado. We've got snow in the background here with the American flag over there. We've been wanting to speak to somebody who lived on base, who experienced the whole Titan One. Obviously, you spent 3 years at a Titan One, you spent 5 years at a Minuteman II as a crew commander, missileer, and you spent a number of years in overseas deployments over here too. So I really want to just ask you so many questions about just the everything about a Titan One, for example. What was life like underground? The missileers, the engineers. You're a missile maintenance officer, for example, and I want to talk about from a different perspective over here, like were there malfunctions with the missiles and the fuels? Raising a missile to the surface. Did the silo doors always open up? Did the actuators always work? Were there any mishaps? Were there any accidents, for example?
Okay.
And overall, was there a fear that one day there was a possibility of deploying those missiles, to Russia, for example? Was there a level of trepidation and fear, for example? But I really wanted to dwell really deep into these sort of particular questions, I guess, kind of thing, because I really want to find out, what was it really like, for example,
Okay, sure.
So Titan One, let me go back. First, before Titan One, what sort of qualifications did you need to be assigned to a Titan One, for example, a missile complex?
I volunteered for ICBM duty in 1961. I saw an
Yep.
article in the Air Force Times.
Okay.
I was in aircraft maintenance at the time, and it wasn't a good place to be, I didn't think, for my career. So I volunteered in September of 1961. I went to Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas for basic missile training and Titan I training. That was almost 6 months of training. We studied everything about missile systems. We sat in colored lines of sewage lines and water lines and propellant lines. We built breadboard computers. We learned mathematics. We did all sorts of things on basic missile systems. And then we had a 6-week training session on Titan I alone, very specific about Titan I, all the details of the entire system, how everything worked in the silos, in the propellant terminal, the equipment terminal, in the control center, the powerhouse. We learned everything about the system. Hours and hours. We spent time on mock-ups. We spent time exercising, practice countdowns, things like that. So they taught us, for almost 6 months. And then I went to Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho, for my assignment.
Right. Did you choose the location of which Titan One you were basically
I didn't
deployed
choose
to?
anything. I volunteered for ICBM duty.
And they just said, okay, Charlie, you're going to Idaho.
I got a call. We were home in Florida on leave. And
Okay.
I got a call from a sergeant up at Hanscom Field, Massachusetts, saying, Lieutenant, you got to come back to the base. You've got to leave in 3 weeks. And you're going to Mountain Home, Idaho. And I said, where's that? He said, it's way up northwest. And I'm at the tip of Florida in Miami.
Yeah.
So I didn't volunteer for it, but I just volunteered for missile duty.
Right.
And that's where they sent me.
So what were the security clearances in the first place to be selected for this type of mission, for
It
example?
required a top secret clearance,
Right.
which took some time. And it required a couple other special things like that.
Did they interviewed you in great detail?
You fill out big, long forms. You go through interviews. They check things like you've got to list references and people you knew over your whole lifetime.
So they determined your
they go talk
allegiance to
them.
the country and
They
the
do.
flag?
That's still standard. It's a standard
Yep.
procedure. They go to people's houses and talk to them about you. Where did you know him and what kind of person was he?
Talk to your neighbors?
Yeah. So full clearance, yeah.
Wow.
So and that's all done before you're
Before you're
approved.
selected, yeah. Because I guess the level of accountability and responsibility in an underground missile complex,
Yeah.
it's quite
The
astronomical.
last 10 or 20 years, they started to change it so they could start your training before you're cleared, and that
Right.
was a problem. And so, people sitting for a long time after they're trained because they weren't cleared for duty. So,
Yeah.
so they did. It's better to clear you first.
Okay, so now you've been allocated to like an Idaho Titan One. Was there a level of excitement, or was there like
it was
was that just that burden of accountability? For example, like the mission, it's a very very delicate.
It was brand new for everybody.
Yeah.
Titan One missileers. There were missileers before in Mason Matador over in Europe. That was all for
Yeah.
us and Thor. So it was all new to us. So when I reported in the Mountain Home in February of 1962, I walked into the lieutenant colonel's office. It was going to be my boss, the chief of maintenance.
And you're a lieutenant
I
this
was, I was
particular
a first
point?
lieutenant. I've been in the Air Force less than a little over 2 years by the time. I walk in and salute and say, Lieutenant Simpson reporting, and he welcomed me and he said, "You're going to be my job control officer." And I didn't know what I was going to be doing before
And
that.
how old were you?
1962, I was 24 years old.
24.
Yep. Yep.
At 24, like I figured like 24-year-olds today, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like just, I mean, at 24 years of age, like you've got that type of mission,
Yeah.
you know, mandate, for example.
Well, I could have done it at 21 too, but I had another job before that. So
You know, legal to drink at 21, but hey, you know, you're a missile maintenance officer on a Titan 1, you know, 4.5
Well,
megaton nuke.
we had young enlisted folks, 18 years old, doing the same. They were doing maintenance on nuclear weapons, and they're 18 years old, and we still do. We trust them.
So did you need like, what, okay, so academia-wise, like, was it physics, was it mathematics? I mean,
To be an officer, an officer, you needed a degree. It didn't matter what it was. My degree was in engineering. We went through periods where they wanted engineers or scientists for those jobs, but it didn't matter. We had everybody, all kinds of backgrounds, in Titan One initially, and then later on. Now Titan One, we had a lot of people who came into it out of aircraft because we were phasing out B-47s
Yep.
and KC-97 and some other airplanes. So a lot of our crew members had come out of aircraft, and they were more senior.
Right.
They were guys who were captains and majors and lieutenant colonels.
and that was part of the nuclear triad, for example, right? So
Yeah,
they were the,
they've been doing it in SAC and Strategic Air Command for
the,
years.
yeah,
So we had a pretty senior crew force, and some of our maintenance officers were the same way.
right.
You've heard of VAT-21, the guy who was shot down in Vietnam and
Yep.
survived by using golf courses. He was my neighbor across the street. He was one of the maintenance officers.
Are you serious?
He'd been a navigator before that. Yeah,
They made a movie about that too.
yeah, they did. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he lived right across the street from me.
Okay, so walking into a Titan 1
Yeah.
for the very first time, I mean, what was your like? Was it like an orientation day or something?
Well, the first thing is when you walk in, we were in our complex home base was an old B-47 nose dock, a big hangar.
Yeah.
And we built a building inside that. So I walk in to the lieutenant colonel's office, and he's sitting there with another colonel. I saluted the wrong colonel. I saluted the wrong. Next to him. And Colonel Janet says, "I'm Colonel Janet. He's Colonel Jensen." So I turned around and saluted him.
So you started, it was
Started out right
not a
away.
bad start.
Yeah, and so he welcomed me, and he said, "Your office is right next door. Let's show it to you." We walked through a
Okay, when I say office,
well,
like,
control center.
okay, right.
We walk in the next door, and it's a cyber control lock because it's a secure area. We walk in, there's nothing there but a big empty room. So this is going to be job control, but you've got to build it. So, and here's your NCOs. There's some sergeants.
And did you have a budget of like items to purchase?
We had stuff, and we had some of the things, but there were here some sergeants sitting on. We had no chairs. Some sergeants sitting on the floor, and this is your staff. So I meet my initial staff that first day, and my job is now to get this job control operation up and running as fast as I can.
And this is a couple of months before active
This
status.
was in February, and we weren't getting our missiles till June, so we had about 4 months.
So you had 4 months to prepare before the
Yeah, we did.
the missiles and the warheads were
Yes,
delivered.
we did. Now, during that time, not only did we have to get all the officers ready and get people trained on their jobs, and in my case, we had this big console we had to put together. It was a big U-shaped console that tracked the status of all the missile sites and all the maintenance, and had to train on that. We also went out to the sites and helped accept the missile sites. I would go out and with a contractor and a checklist, I would go out into a missile silo, and he would show me where everything was, and I would check off to make sure it was there. Or he would show me this is operating. I would verify it was. And most of us did that, officers and NCOs. We helped the contractor accept the missile sites, and we also learned more about it. My first time on site was probably 2 weeks after I got to Mountain Home, and I went out and did that. I toured the site, and then I
Well,
walked
first
through the
impressions, vast,
big,
it's
monstrous.
yeah, it's
A whole lot of stuff.
gigantor.
I mean, the powerhouse you walk into, it's enormous.
It's yeah, that's one of our favourites. The Power Dome is very, very impressive.
Yeah.
But we also like the equipment terminal too, as well too. You know,
Well, everything.
yeah,
All-
it's people don't understand it. It literally, it's an underground city. It's the largest of the underground missile complexes.
is.
It's the original. It's one of the OG motherships and what have you. But I've got to ask you. So the missiles were delivered from what, California, or were they from
They were manufactured
Denver.
outside Denver.
outside Denver at Marietta?
The Martin Company then. Yeah, Martin.
And they just drove them The
They
missiles?
were flown in initially. They came in C-133s. One of my jobs, if a C-133 came in with a missile, I had to have an officer present to offload the missile off the airplane. So I would go down with the missile handling people and let them take the missile off the aircraft in 2 stages.
Okay, I was going to say that it was in two
They
stages.
were on their trailers, their transport trailers in the aircraft. And that was a tough job just because it was a tight squeeze. I've got pictures you'll see of that.
It's like 100 foot tall once
But it was in 2
the
pieces.
two parts are joined
It was in
together.
2 pieces.
Yeah.
We took it off there, and then they would take it into our hangar and make sure it's prepped and everything ready, and then take it to the site and install it.
At what point would they basically add the warhead to it? Once in the silo?
That was much later.
In the silo, or
Yeah. Now the Martin Company installed the missiles originally. We didn't do it. We watched. Our NCOs would go out and stand and watch them use the Coles crane and the MH1 crane and install the missiles. We didn't install them. They put a exercise warhead on each one, not a real warhead, an exercise warhead, and that was all in the preparation for the acceptance of the site.
right?
In late May and early June, we began accepting the sites. Each missile site, each complex of 3 missiles, had to successfully go through a launch loading exercise.
And the likes of the liquid oxygen.
All 3 missiles,
Yep.
liquid oxygen, full of RP1, full of
Which is the refined kerosene.
The kerosene. That was always loaded, but they all had to.
Yeah.
They had to
So they will add the liquid oxygen after the.
You had to load out of the pellet terminal. You had to pump liquid oxygen in all 3 missiles
Yep.
at the same time, and raise all 3 missiles topside at the same time, and they had to sit there for a certain length of time, so Martin Company could prove that it worked. So we had to do that at all 3 sites.
So proof of concept was established.
Yes,
And
and we would
it was
say,
verified.
okay, we accept it, and we did that, and they all 3 were successful.
Yeah.
They worked the first time.
Was there ever a point where the elevator just didn't work?
Oh, there were many times.
I mean, okay, so it's loaded with RP1, and with obviously with the liquid oxygen, you've got a certain period of time. You've got almost like a 1 hour period, right?
Yeah.
And so the missiles in the crib,
Yep.
and the elevator didn't work. Was it because of the ethylene glycol, or what was the what was the main malfunction?
We had to run every missile an exercise about every 3 months. Did a lot of exercises.
Yeah.
And they were done. We would take the RP1 off and just load liquid oxygen. And we had them fail for a variety of errors or problems in the silo. One example, there's a valve that was called the sword valve that was at the bottom of the platform. That as the missile started up, this valve was a wedge-shaped valve,
Yep.
and it would pull out of the sheath, the sword, and as it pulled out, it would increase the orifice and make more ethylene glycol flow, and therefore the launcher could go faster going topside.
Yep.
If it didn't pull out, then the launcher would stay in creep in very slow speed.
Okay.
And it would shut down because there was a timer. You had to get topside in so much time.
So it was a 15-minute process raising
It
to
was
the
about
surface.
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
But we had one of those fail. The sword valve stuck because the glycol got sticky and stuck. We had a major who was our maintenance superintendent who solved that problem. Not legally, but he solved it. He used piano wire. He wrapped piano wire around the top of the sword valve
Use piano
and
wire.
around the bottom of the launcher. So when the launcher started up, it pulled that valve all the way out.
So did he have the piano wire underground, or do you have to call
He had piano
somebody
wire.
topside to say, "Does anybody have any piano
We had it at
wire?"
home. This guy was one of the first person I ever knew to have a 4-wheel drive.
So he was like a real MacGyver, right?
Oh, he was. He really was. He would go from top to the bottom of the silo by going out and grabbing one of the cables and sliding down, which wasn't legal either, but he would do it. But that was a problem we had. So
Yeah.
we had failures. Probably, Titan 1 was not very reliable, and the success rate was about 2/3 of the exercises were successes. So about a third were failures,
Right.
and a lot of them were launcher
Yeah.
platform.
And how much of the power was generated from the other power dome, or was it from the grid?
Everything. We were on the grid. We were not on the grid.
Okay, so basically
We were never on
the
the
diesel generators in the power dome was basically powering the entire
That was it.
community.
Yeah.
There was no redundancy.
No redundancy.
So I guess the redundancy was if you had one of the generators and then you had the other 3 as a backup, right?
But it took 3 to 4 to do our launch loading on all 3 missiles. Day-to-day operation, we operated 1 generator.
Right.
You might do 2 generators if you're doing a lot of work in one of the silos, but there was no backup. And if that one missile, that one
So
generator,
if those diesel generators malfunctioned,
if
that
it
was
shut down, it got very dark in there.
Yeah, so there was nothing on the grid. It was basically just the diesel generators.
Just the grid. Yeah.
And you had a total of 6 megawatt because each generator was about 1.5 megawatt each.
Yep. And it got very dark in there, and that happened. It happened several times. where the power would fail. But during a launch exercise or a launch, you took all four of them.
Incredible, incredible. So I've got to ask you here. So obviously, historically speaking, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. We had Khrushchev in Russia. We had Castro in Cuba. And we had basically the deployment of Russian missiles to the island of Cuba, which was not too far away from Key West in Florida, for example. And for the very first time, you're now on your DEFCON 3 and then DEFCON 2, basically meaning you're underground for the next however long, and you're on DEFCON 2 and the missiles are being ready to be deployed. Once you get that mandate from the President of the United States, which was Kennedy at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, was there a time of like fear? I mean, this is, the Cold War here, like you're at the heart of it. 1962, you're on DEFCON 2, meaning DEFCON 1 means you deploy.
That's right. Let me tell you how we got into it. We had accepted our missiles, the last one about 6 weeks or 8 weeks before that. We were in the middle of running exercises in all of our missiles. That morning, it was a Saturday morning in October, I was working in my control center. We were preparing a missile at Charlie site for exercise the following Monday. So we had about 100 people out there installing TV cameras, taking off the ordnance, downloading the RP1. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call on a black telephone, direct line telephone to the Wing Command Post at Mountain Home. And the major told me, he said, "Lieutenant, put your missile back on alert right now. Don't ask why."
In other words, send them back down into the solar.
No, just put it back on alert. So SAC says, put it back on alert with everything ready to go. So I called out to the missile site. And I talked to the major out there that was preparing the missile. I said, "Major Grosseltz, I just got a call from the command post. They said, put Charlie 1 back on alert right now. Don't ask questions." He said, "I can't do that." I said, "You better call the command post." He called the command post. He called back in about 15 seconds and said, "We're putting it back on alert." We didn't know why. All we knew was something was going on. At the same time, we hear B-47s cranking up outside. All the B-47s were being dispersed. They didn't know why either. They sent them to airports all over the country with nuclear weapons. That night, we were told, go to a 24-hour schedule, work 12 on, 12 off, 2 crews on each missile site, on alert all the time, always have 1 crew on the consoles, always have 4 people at the consoles, don't have somebody at the bathroom. If somebody has to go to the bathroom, call the other crew that's in the bedroom, have them come take his place. We didn't know why still. Sunday, we were given intelligence briefings about what was going on, but not detailed. We knew something was happening.
Something was developing.
Something was happening that was involving Cuba and missiles. Monday, President Kennedy came on and spoke, and we watched, and we knew what it was. And at the same time he was speaking, we went to DEFCON 3. And then we knew we were serious about this whole thing. By that time, all the B-47s and tankers at Mountain Home were gone. They were dispersed other places, and SAC was on full alert. And we were working 24-hour schedules everywhere on base. And we knew it was serious. Then a day or two later, we went to DEFCON 2. And that was even more serious. So all we knew was we were about to go to war. We're as close as we can get to go to nuclear war. And we're ready, and we got to stay ready. And that's what we did for the next 6 weeks.
And your mission mandate at that particular point was to make sure that those missiles can be deployed to their intended target.
That they were sitting ready to go on full alert. We stopped every activity that involved taking them off alert. Normally, day to day with a Titan I, you would go out and inspect the missile top to bottom. You'd lower the work platforms and put them back up. And that took it off alert for a few minutes. You had to go out and refuel it or top up the RP1, things like that. And all that stopped. It only could happen if it was essential. So everything stopped that would take the missile off alert. And the crews were sitting out there, as I said, 4 guys at the consoles. They couldn't even leave the consoles to go eat. They had to be relieved by somebody else. So they were sitting ready to launch.
At that particular point in time, were you able to sort of convey and communicate to your loved ones as to what was transpiring?
You changed. I was working 12-hour shifts, and I got augmented in my office, so I got to go home for 12 hours every day. And my wife knew full well what it was. A lot of the families of the bomber crews left the base. They went back home to their parents or up in the mountains to camp. People were scared. The missile crew families all tended to stay on base.
Yeah.
And we knew, my wife knew where her assigned shelter was. Our basement was our assigned shelter. She knew where that was. We talked about her going home to Florida. She said, "No, I'm going to stay right here with you."
Wow.
And there's a good story about her in our book on the Cuban Crisis. You'll see about her experience. But we all stayed, and it was nobody went anywhere. I mean, the base was quiet because a lot of people were gone, deployed, dispersed to airports. The missileers were all there, but we were working 12-hour shifts, so we were either home resting or at work.
Yeah. And was there a level of expectation in relation to like going to DEFCON 1 at that particular point? Did you
We knew
perceive it
that,
as like, okay, this is the end of the planet. If we launch, they launch, it's the apocalypse.
we knew that would happen, but we at the same time we knew we were very strong, and we thought that
It'd be a deterrence,
we're here for deterrence. That's our job, and we're sitting here.
mutually assured destruction.
But we also had the resolve to launch when we had to. That's part of being in that business is you've got to have the resolve to go to war if you need to, and that was never a problem. We talk about it often. That was something you were asked often. You were asked by your bosses, "Are you sure you can push that button or turn those keys?" And you had to say, "Yes, sir, I'm ready."
Wow. And I've got to ask you, hypothetically speaking, if you were in a position and you guys actually deployed, um, obviously the Soviets would, the law of reciprocity, they would reciprocate,
Of course.
And they knew where the sites were. No, and obviously, depending if it was an airburst weapon, I mean, in a time when you were quite safe, unless it was a ground burst detonation. The blast locks would shut, to prevent any nuclear fallout, radiation, chemical or biological.
Mm-hmm.
What was the life expectancy, for example? So you had not perishable items, they can actually survive for 30 days.
The complexes had food, water.
What sort of food? MREs, I
It
imagine.
was before MREs. It was like sea rations and that sort of thing. Like the Army used to have canned food that lasted a long time. They had fresh food on site too for a while, but not very long. And they could last, they figured, 30 days for everybody on the site.
Right.
And once the nuclear blast was over, then you could open the blast valves and have fresh air again.
Yeah.
The diesels had enough diesel fuel to run 30 days.
There would not have been any shortages of water to drink.
There was no problem with water. We had wells.
Yeah. And you had those tanks.
We had sewage treatment. We had wells. We had all that stuff.
Yeah. Except you didn't have Amazon Prime or Netflix, like
We
movies.
had TV.
You had TV?
We did have TV.
You had reception down there.
Boise Channel 3 and 7.
Was there like an outside line, like where you can just call a loved
You
one?
could call
Any
home.
bit of an emergency, you can call
You
home
could call your family. You could talk to your wife. Yeah.
from underground. Okay.
There were telephones. We had local telephone system. I'll tell you about that later. But,
Yeah. So, Charlie, you're sharing a story before we were speaking, and I think it's quite comical, but it's like there was a particular point in time at the Idaho Title One where you guys were stationed at, and the missile on the actual on the on the elevator in the crypt, it actually got stuck at the surface level, and literally you had a popsicle. And for how many days was the missile stuck at the surface level?
we had exercise every missile was installed.
Yeah.
And we probably got one stuck every fifth or sixth time. Usually a failure of the launch platform to go down. And
And was that an ethylene glycol or was that a power issue?
it usually was something to do with the launcher itself. I don't know exactly, but it was either the pump didn't work or a valve stuck or something like
Yeah.
that. Usually it was something to do with that, the ethylene glycol or the Waterbury unit or something. It didn't work. And so we had to get it down within about an hour. Otherwise, the center of gravity would change and you couldn't safely lower it. So they got stuck topside. It took about 3 or 4 days for the locks to boil off, liquid oxygen. So it sat topside, covered with frost for that time.
So it still contained the RP1, but you had to blow off the LOX.
RP1 was off. We took the RP1 off.
Okay, right.
So it was just
discharged.
liquid oxygen. And so it was sitting topside, a full, complete missile sitting topside, 100 feet tall.
With its warhead.
Yeah, yep. And white frost all over it. And
Was this during the winter or the summertime?
Yes, anytime. It could be any time
Right.
of the year. We exercised year round. So
Yeah.
but winters in Idaho are not that severe. Normally,
Yeah.
So, but one of our sites was right by Highway 30 in Idaho, which it's now the interstate. But Highway 30 knows it. You could see it from the interstate highway. And so it's not unusual to have one stuck topside like that. And one of them, one night, I was in job control late, as I was quite often, and the crew commander called me up and said, Charlie, I've got a problem. I said, somebody's shooting at our missile. So we saw muzzle flashes. And I've deployed the security police out there to see what's going
So
on.
they were outside the perimeter fence, which is what, how many, 300, 500
Yeah,
yards?
300 yards or so from the missile, and this was way well outside that. And the cops and the security police went out in their truck outside the fence to try to find out what was going on. And at sunrise, they found some 30-06 cartridges.
Okay, so how many rounds did he fire off?
Just a couple.
Okay,
And he was screaming away then.
so you had a deranged, potentially
Sure.
psychotic
We
farmer
don't think he was deranged. He probably was drunk. We suspect it was hunting season.
shooting at a Titan 1.
He probably was
So-
going home from hunting, and he saw this. Hey, that's a good target. And he was so drunk he couldn't hit it. But
How safe was the warhead? I mean, okay, so let's say there was somebody like firing at the
totally safe.
totally safe.
Yeah, there's so many safety things, and
Yeah, there was a lot of
We-
redundancies
we-
against like any potential mishaps.
a warhead's not armed until it re-enters the atmosphere,
Right.
so it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
So it's got to go through certain G forces, very high G forces,
Yeah.
before it's armed. But that happened, and it was interesting.
And with a Titan 1, I mean, like obviously there would have been a lot of the military brass, having a look to see where all the taxpayer dollars went, Were there any civilians allowed in a Titan 1 during operational status?
Oh yeah, we would house open houses and have the locals come out and see.
So who would screen the civilians? Would the military police screen them
We would
to
just
make
escort
sure there
them.
wasn't a double agent?
We would just escort them. In those days, you didn't worry about things like we do nowadays either, from that standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, there may have been agents. I mean, we knew that. We always knew the Soviets could drive up to our missile sites anywhere in the country and park outside and take pictures. I mean, we couldn't do it to theirs, but they could. So they knew exactly where our sites were. But no, we had open houses often. Both
Did you take your wife down there?
Sure. Yeah. On holidays.
It's a hold on. So your wife has been inside of a Titan 1 during operational status.
On holidays, it's still typical now. The families go out to the missile sites and have Christmas
Like
dinner.
Easter, Thanksgiving,
Christmas
Christmas.
dinner, Thanksgiving, with the people on alert.
But could they go into the missile silo and touch it?
Sure, you can ask.
Because you're talking like you shared the story where in a Titan 1 missile silo you can actually touch the missile compared to the Minuteman II or the Minuteman III.
We would take them down to see everything. And we often had tours. We wanted to educate everybody on.
So, honey, this is a Titan 1 missile with a 4.5 megaton nuke.
Sure, yeah. We've always done that to educate everybody on the base, not just the families, but everybody, to see what the mission is.
But adults only, right? You couldn't take kids or teenage.
Sure. Yeah.
You took kids down there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was like a little orientation day, So this is a missile.
Yes, we had school kids with everything. Yeah, and we still do that. We educate people and what's going on, and
Wow.
it's better they know. They're paying for it.
Yeah. But this is like the heart of the Cold War, and this is like, obviously, I imagine that would have been allowed like at a DEFCON 4 status, correct?
We were at DEFCON 4 the whole time.
Yeah, at DEFCON 4, you can, okay.
Yeah.
But DEFCON 3, okay,
Oh, no.
civilians,
No, then all that stops.
no tours.
Nothing. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, because, we own the Titan and a couple of other underground missile complexes. And, every day when we're down there, we're thinking, imagine the guys who are working here. What were they thinking? The fate of the Western world was on this young 21, 22. You were 24 years of age.
You don't think about that so much as you've got a job to do.
Yeah.
You're busy. You're working, especially the first couple of years, you're working 12, 14-hour days. And all you're worried about is, I got to fix this thing so I can go home. So, yeah.
But, you're like a missile maintenance officer kind of thing. So, I mean, were there any like emergency calls like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m.?
Oh, yes. When I would go home, my phone would ring probably every 45 minutes to an hour with some problem at one of the sites in Titan 1. Because there was something that was happening all the time out there. A lot of it was a minor.
And the Titan 1 was prone to a lot of malfunction.
It was. It was a very complex system. It was.
It was one of the early OGs
Yeah.
too, so expected.
And usually it was something like the crew had found a problem with some light came on and said you had a problem in the propellant terminal or in the equipment terminal or in the launcher, and had to have maintenance come out and fix it. So that I had to call my boss and tell him, and I had to make sure we reported up to our headquarters. So yeah, and it was.
But you had the buddy system where you're with another officer at a time.
No, I'm talking about when I'm home and asleep.
Okay, right.
Call. I got to report up then. But it was constant. I mean, my 3.5 years in that job, I probably had less sleep than any work job I've ever had just because of that.
Wow.
But it was part of the job. I got very good at answering the phone and going back to sleep.
Yeah. And at one particular point in time, obviously, because with a Titan one, I mean the missile, it's loaded with RP1, but then you have to within an hour before a potential launch, it'll have to be fueled up with the LOX, with the liquid oxygen.
Yeah.
Did you ever think there was going to come a time where that technology will be obsolete? Because of how long it takes to raise to the surface level, and then with no guarantees that the elevator system or the platform will raise it. So do you ever think eventually this will be decommissioned? And was there talk, were there rumors at the time?
Well, it started right away because we were fielding in the early 1960s. We were building Atlas sites, Titan 1 sites, Titan 2 sites, and Minuteman sites.
Yeah.
And
So we're talking about LSF, LSE, LSF, Titan 1, and the Minuteman II.
Minuteman 2 again.
Right.
And we'd already built the Atlas D and E before that. We probably wouldn't have a long life. And there was a lot of talk about that. McNamara especially was saying, we've got...
And McNamara was the defense
Secretary
minister
of Defense.
at the time.
We're
Also
building,
Secretary of Defense.
Yeah. We're building all these new Minuteman sites at 6 bases. We don't need Atlas D and E and Atlas F, and probably not Titan 1. In 1964, we thought that they would phase out Atlas D, Atlas E, and Titan and Atlas F, and leave Titan 1. We were told that. And I went to a conference in the summer of 1964 as the job control officer down to March Air Force Base, and they announced there that we would be closing Titan 1 beginning in 3 months.
And this was in 1964.
64. So I went back and told my boss, and he said, "That can't be true." I said, "Colonel, they just told me."
They just spent $47 million in $1960 building it,
Well,
and this is like 2 years, in its operational phase, and they're looking at decommissioning it
We were in a
already.
major upgrade with the system at the time too.
Yeah, but I guess that was when I wanted to convert it to a solid state fuel, where it's fully fueled.
Well, we had just gone through the Cuban crisis.
Yep.
We just put Minuteman I on alert very quickly during the Cuban crisis in 1962, and we're building 1,000 Minuteman sites around the country. So there was no doubt.
Across Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas.
Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Missouri. So there was no doubt that you take a missile that can launch in a minute and sits on alert without any maintenance compared to a missile that sits underground and should be raised above ground.
Right.
It takes 15 minutes to launch.
Yeah.
So you're going to take the new one.
Well, that's very valuable minutes when it comes to deployment of a nuke.
Well, it is,
Yeah.
So the last half of 1964 and the first half of 65, we were removing the missiles and phasing out. So my job the last 6 months was overseeing removal of the missiles at sea site as a maintenance officer.
Oh, wow.
And
This is the other decommissioning phase.
yeah,
And was it talks about, so we're going to decommission this, about repurposing or possibly even retrofitting a Titan 1, because they spent so much money building it. I mean, the military had unlimited budget, for example. So there wasn't any talk about retrofitting or repurposing it?
all we talked about is that we've got all these sites, 187 sites, I think it was something like that, a lot of them anyway, that are not good for anything else.
So when you say decommission, the Ds, the LC, the LSFs, and the Titan
Ds,
1s.
Eats, and F, and Titan. We've got all this to decommission. We'll take everything out that's worth anything to the government and leave everything else.
Take it all to scrap and then auction the rest.
Yep, take
And
everything
then
out you can.
leave the rest to people like us
Yep.
to clean up all the asbestos and the remediation on their own
We
time.
left consoles, we left tech orders, we left tools, we left desks.
You left quite a few in our bunker,
Left everything, yeah.
our missile complex.
We went through, I went through with my sergeant and said, anything you want to take home with you? Because there are things we were going to throw away. We knew we were going to throw away.
I need to find these people.
So I've got a big socket about this big that I've got that was very handy for my Jaguar E-Type when I had to change it.
So you had your Jaguar
I
E-Type.
had to change it.
You might be the astronauts back in the 60s with the Corvettes.
Yeah.
So you had your Jaguar E-Type. You got your Alfa Romeo
Yep.
in your garage right now. You love your convertibles.
Yep.
Charlie, you're a rock star.
On
my
the
friend.
access road to Seaside, I go 157 miles an hour. I drove out one day in the E-Type, and that's how fast I got going to the site. It was a straight highway for about 8 miles. I said, I'm going to see how fast it'll go.
I love it. So, okay, there weren't any plans to retrofit, no plans to repurpose or turn it into a data center.
Nope.
Basically, okay, let's just take all the valuable bits, give it over to the other salvos, let them scrap the rest, and let's just permanently seal it. And then the focus there was Okay, you were then stationed. Well, then did you request the Minuteman II because you were a crew commander on Mr. Lear for a Minuteman II for what, a period of 5 years?
What SAC did, the command did, is
Strategic Air Command.
yeah, they sent a team around to all the bases, a personnel team, to talk to everybody, officer and enlisted both. And
Do we have an opportunity for you, son?
well, no, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Here's the options. What would you like to do? We had called the dream sheet.
Okay, so what were the options?
Well, you fill out a dream sheet. It's any of the other missile.
I've got a
bases.
dream sheet.
Dream sheet. That's what what I want to do the rest of my life. So you fill out your dream sheet.
So they gave you like a bucket list item. Where do you want to go?
So I put down I want to be a Titan II maintenance officer at Davis-Monthan because I've been stationed up in Idaho, and that was my first choice. And I had a couple other choices. And a few weeks later, they came out with the announcements. They said, here's where everybody's going. Says Lieutenant or Captain Simpson, you're going to Grand Forks, North Dakota, to be one of the first crew members in the new Minuteman II system at Grand Forks. You're going to be operations. You're not going to be maintenance. So that's what I did.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, going from a Titan I to a Minuteman II, was that like?